As we finish Chapter 5 today, I want to go over the last of the functions that are covered in this chapter. First of all, we have some what are called is functions that are simply a logical test to see if something is blank, is text. We can look at the different kinds of is functions by going to our Insert Function button. It's basically a function wizard. If we select the All category, this lists every function pretty much that is built into Excel. And if we go to the list alphabetically under is, notice we have is blank, which checks to see if something's an empty cell, is an error, is even, is odd, is a formula, is logical, etc. Is payment, is text. So let's look at some examples of those functions. Here's a function that says is even, and I have a number here that says, is this an even number? Well, number 1 is odd, so this should say false, and it does. Notice if I select this number and say, is this number right here even, that should be true, and it is. This only works on numeric functions or on numeric values. In other words, if I say, here's the number 1, but it's not really the number 1, is it? It's just text that spells out the word O-N-E. So this gives us an error because it says, I can't determine whether a chunk of text is even or odd. You've got to give me a number. We said that dates are numbers, right? So if I put this date in here, that is a numeric value. If I say, is that even? It says that is even. Well, how would it know whether it's even or not? Well, if we convert that to a number format, it'll tell us what day this is based on January 1, 1900 being day 1, and it says this is actually the number 43,384, which is even. So it doesn't have to look like a number. As long as it actually is a number, Excel will tell us whether it is even or odd. Is something text? Here we're checking to see if O-N-E is text, and it says that's true. But if I say, how about this? Is this text? It says no, that's not text, that's numeric. Here's another one. It says, is this blank? I am going to, this cell looks blank, doesn't it? If I double click in it, it looks like there was a space character in it. Now it actually is blank. So this cell actually is blank because that says true. As we saw, if I put a space character in it, here's 1, 2, 3 space characters. Now when I press enter, it should say false because that cell is no longer empty, is blank. There's one other thing that we use oftentimes to specify if we want a cell to look blank, and that is an empty string like that equals empty string. That's a formula, and it says place an empty string in this cell. Well, now this was trying to take the value of it, saying is it even, and it says I can't tell you what to do with that because it is not a number. And notice if I say, what about this cell that has that empty string in it right here? It says that's not blank. I'm going to highlight that so we know which cell it is. That has that empty string in it. It has this formula that says put an empty string here. So it looks empty, but it is not empty. So again, if I delete that out of there, as soon as I press enter, this should turn true because now that cell actually is blank. So that's how the is functions work. Another function is the IFERROR function. This is really handy because users don't like to see those value hashtag n/a divided by 0. That can make some users panic. Oh no, I have broken Excel. So we can say, what if there's an error? I might want to tell the user something specific, or I might want it just to stay blank if there were an error. So this function says, it's very simple really. It says, here's the value that I want in that cell, but if that value turns out to be an error, then give me this. So it says, here's the value I want, and then here's what I would put if that value is an error. Let's look at this. This says, my formula says multiply D1 times E1. Multiply those two things together. And if that works, just give me that product. But if that produces an error, then tell me something's wrong. So let's spread this out so that we can see D1 and E1 right now are text times a number. And Excel says, I can't multiply text times a number. I don't know how to do that. So it says that's going to produce an error. Here's what it would produce if I didn't have that if error. If I just said equals this cell times that cell, it's going to say, what are you talking about? But here, I use the if error to say, if that's an error, tell me something's wrong, don't tell me this. Now, if I change this to a number, say number 4, 4 times 5 is 20. And so both these cells should show me that product. And they do. This one works fine without the if error as long as there's not an error. So the if error helps us tell the user something that we want to tell them. Or I could say, if this thing's an error, then just make this cell blank, double quote, double quote. And so it's blank, meaning there's an error there. But if I make it where there's no error, then it gives me that product. The index and match functions are very nice functions to use together. The index function says, give me a reference, then give me a row number and a column number, and I will tell you what's at the intersection of that row and that column. So the reference is this list of women, men, and pets names. And I've told it to look in row 5, column 3. Row 5, column 3 is right here. So that should say Elmo. And it does. This is using index with the numbers themselves. What if I said 2, column 2? That should be Alan. And it is. What if I gave a row number or a column number that did not exist in the range? What if I said row 2, column 4? There are only 3 columns in our range, aren't there? It says that's a reference error because you're asking me to go to a 4th column and you haven't referenced it. It's not in the area. So we'll put that back on Elmo. Now, obviously, we don't want people to have to memorize a big table and what row and column do they want. We would want people to be able to type in, tell me Utah and women. Tell me women's names, the most popular woman's name in Utah, let's say. And we wouldn't want them just to type it in. We would want them to be able to pick it from a list. Let's look at how the match function works. Here is a match looking for a row. The match function says, give me a lookup value, then tell me the table, the array that you want to look it up in. Now the match function pretty much has to be one row or one column, because what the match function does, instead of like the VLOOKUP telling me the value that is next to that, it's going to tell me what position that item is in the list. So if I say look up D9, which is Utah, then this match type, just like in the VLOOKUP, this is an exact match by putting a 0 here. So it's looking up Utah. Utah is in the 4th position there, isn't it, in this range? And it says that's in row 4. Now, it looks for the position based on alphabetical order. What if I do not put these in alphabetical order? What if I put Utah here and I put something else here? Now notice it found Utah, and it says now that's in the 2nd row. So it doesn't matter. The match function doesn't care whether it's in alphabetical order or not. It just finds that wherever it is in the range. What if it appeared more than once? It's only going to find the first occurrence of it. So let's put it back the way it was, and now it should find row 4. We can also look up a column, and notice here we say look up what's here and go to this range in this row and tell me what position pets are in. Pets are in position 3, aren't they? So it says that matches the 3rd column of that row that I looked up, pets. What if we put pets in the 1st position? Now it says, oh, now it's in the 1st position. It's also in the 3rd position, but I'm just going to tell you the first time I find it. So let's put that back the way it was, and as soon as I press enter, this number 1 should change to 3 because it's in the 3rd column of that row. Very nice. It's a very nice function. We can use that in combination. In other words, if I put 4 and 3 in here, where is row 4, column 3? That is Big Bird, isn't it? But I don't want to have to know what the row and column number are. I can say, why don't you look up this thing and tell me what row it's in? Why don't you look up this thing and tell me what column it's in? So with the index function, instead of putting numbers there, we can use the match function in place of the numbers. We're saying go to this reference, which is that little table. What row number do you want? We want exactly the same thing that we had here. Look up what's in D9 and find out what position that's in. So this is the exact formula. Notice this formula. Match D9, our table, 0. That's exactly what this was. Match D9, our table, 0. So we're using the match function so that somebody doesn't have to know any numbers. We just say pick a state and pick women, men, or pets, and I'll look up the number for you of the row and the column, and then I'll tell you what's at the intersection. So right here we have a drop-down list which lists everything that's in our state column. Here we have a drop-down list which lists everything that's in our column row, our genre role. So now if I say I would like Arkansas and I would like women, it says Arkansas women is Stephanie, and that is doing it with the combination of the index function and using the match function to find that number of its position in the column or in the row. The choose function is a little different from the ones we've been talking about. The ones we've been discussing look up a value, or they return a single value. The choose function has a very nice feature in that it can return a range. Let's look up that choose function. The choose function says it chooses a value or action to perform from a list of values based on an index number. The index number says, tell me which value argument is selected. The index number must be between 1 and 254. In other words, you could have up to 254 values to pick from, and those values can not only be numbers, but they can be cell references, they can be defined names, which can be more than a one-cell range. So let's do this. Typically we would want to name our ranges, but let's do it without the range. Let's say we have two different sets of numbers, and some people are going to want to use range 1 and some people are going to want to use range 2. So the index number is which argument do you want to use. I'm going to put index number 1, and value 1 I'm going to say is this range. Value 2 I'm going to say is this range. They're different sizes, aren't they? And now it says, based on what you've told me, you've given me two different ranges and you've told me to pick the first one. I'm going to pick this one. That's what I'm going to give you. And that thing that I give you is actually a range. We have named these two ranges, range 1 and range 2. So notice up here, range 1 is these 6 cells, range 2 is these 12 cells. Now, it is true that the choose function can return a range, but it cannot put a range in a cell. However, you can use another function to utilize what's in that range. So for instance, if we said choose range number 1, which is these blue cells, and sum all those cells, take the sum of everything that's in range 1. Now it says choose one of these values that follows. Which one? The first one. So that's range 1. And when you return that range, sum everything in that range. It says the sum of everything in range 1 is 31. Well, if I select this and look down in the status bar, it says yes indeed, the sum of that is 31. What's the sum of range 2? It is 301. 301. And so if I change this to the number 2, it's going to return this second range and take the sum of all the numbers in that range, and that should be 301. And it is. I don't have to name the ranges. I could say choose the second range where we just give them as references, and now I should get 301 as well. Another way that we can use the choose function is with a VLOOKUP. For instance, let's say we wanted to look up a number in column 1. Let's put the same numbers in column 1 over here, 3, 7, and 4. Let's say we wanted to look up the number 3 in range 1, and we wanted to get column 2 back. What should this return if we're looking up the number 3 in the first column of range 1? It should give us the number 5. We would want that to be an exact match, wouldn't we? So this should give us the number 5. What if I said do that same thing in range 2? Well, it's going to give me the same thing, isn't it? Let's change that number. So now it says look up in range 2. Well, what if we want the person not to have to say range 1 or range 2, but what if we have those things picked somewhere else? We could say look up the number 3. What range do we want? Well, we want to choose something. We want to choose 1 from range 1 or range 2. This says choose the first of these things, and now that should give us the number 5, shouldn't it? But if we say choose the second of these things, that should give us the number 47. And we say, yeah, but somebody still has to know that number. Ah, no. They could just say pick shipping method 1 or 2, and we go look this up wherever they picked the shipping method 1 or 2, and it puts it in this formula. So that's how the choose function works. It says choose this item from this list of values or cell references or cell ranges. But just remember, if this is a single cell, actually, let's do it this way. If these were single cells, how about this cell, that cell, that cell? If those were single cells, it's going to pick the second range, which is G5, and take the sum of that. In this case, I don't think we'd even need the sum function, because it can pick one of these ranges and tell us what's in that cell. So this should give us the number 1, and it does. This should give us the number 16. Pick the first of those things. And this should give us whatever's in that third cell, which is over here. That should be the number 9. So the point is, the choose function chooses something based on its position in the following list. If it's a number, a value, it'll put it right there. If it's a cell reference, it'll tell you what's in that cell. So instead of number 9 being there, what if that was the word 9? It says, I'll just tell you what's in that cell, okay? But if it's a cell reference, you can't return a reference. You can't return a range to a cell, but you can do something with the values in that range. So that's the little caveat with the choose function.